welcome to my channel. My name is Tay, and in this video I am going to show you how to make a standing heart cake. If you're making any type of structured cake, you have to have a sturdy board. So here you'll see that I had a wood plank, and on top of that I have a square cake board. So I got the wood plank from Home Depot, and it did not come in the size that I needed it to, so I had to have them cut it for me and trim it down to the size of my board. So my mom is right here helping me to measure where I am going to stick my threaded rod in. And so I'm doing that on both the board and my wooden plank.
Because you think you're so close to the edge of my counter, and I think that's so stupid and irresponsible.
Now I'm drilling a hole into the wood board, and you really have to make sure that whatever size drill bit that you're using is the same size as your threaded rods. So when you go to Home Depot and you get your threaded rods, and I'll show you what a threaded rod looks like in the next few clips, but when you go to Home Depot and you get your threaded rods, you have to make sure that they're the same size as your bits, or your rods will be too big or too small for the hole. Now here I am adding some hot glue, because now I'm going to place my square cake board on top of this wooden board, and I want to make sure that it sticks to it. Now that both of my boards are hot glued together, I'm going to use the same hole to drill straight through my cake board. This was my first time making a structured cake, and I had to improvise. I did not realize that my board would need to have some type of legs or feet. So what you see here is I am improvising with some wooden beads, because I needed to put some type of platform underneath my board, so that way it would elevate it off of the counter, because if I didn't do that, then when I place the bolt around my threaded rod to secure it in place, it can prevent my cake board from being level if it has no elevation. So that is what this is for. Here I have my threaded rod, my nut, and a washer. So these are all of the pieces that you will need to create a solid foundation and structure. Can we just look at my nails and how cute they look though? I miss that set. Okay, so I have inserted my threaded rod, and you'll need 2 nuts and 2 washers and 1 threaded rod. So here I am screwing in the nut so that I can tighten the threaded rod to the board to make sure that it is sturdy and can't go nowhere. One thing that I did off camera was trim my threaded rod. So I had to make sure that my threaded rod was tall enough but not too short, and I did not have the proper materials at home to do that, so I had to trim it using some wire cutters at Home Depot. Now that my structure is assembled, I am going to wrap the threaded rod with floral tape. And the reason I'm doing this is because if this cake was for a client, I would not want the cake to be touching the threaded rod. So I want to wrap it in something that is food safe and that will protect the cake. So you can use floral tape, you can use food grade safe electrical tape, I believe it's called. I saw it at Home Depot, but it was too much money. I've also seen people use straws. So you have options, but I just went with what I had. I'm not gonna lie, this was probably my least favorite part about making this cake. It was just very tedious, time consuming, and it took way more time than I expected. Gravity is not our friend sometimes, so I had to create a base for the cake layers to sit on top of. Had I just carved a heart shape out of cake and stood it up, after an hour or so, it probably would be a blob of cake. All I'm using is a square styrofoam block to get the perfect shape for the bottom of the heart. And here I'm just cleaning it up, making sure that it's even. Now that I have my styrofoam cleaned up, I'm going to use it to trace and cut out a piece of cardboard. The reason that I'm doing this is because I don't want my cake to sit directly on the styrofoam. So what this piece of cardboard is going to do is going to act as a buffer between my cake and the styrofoam. This piece of cardboard is also going to act as additional support for my cake. You can never have enough support. Now I'm drilling a hole into the styrofoam base, and then I'm also going to drill a hole into the board. I'm doing this so that I can easily slide the board and the styrofoam base right onto the threaded rod. Now I'm adding some hot glue to the cake board so that I can stick it directly on the styrofoam base. And because the cake will not be directly touching the styrofoam base, it's fine. It'll still be considered food safe. Finally, we can get to the fun part. This was my favorite part, but I realized how many mistakes I made. The first mistake that I made was that my threaded rod was way too short. My threaded rod should have been much higher. And that's why I said earlier in the video that you have to make sure that you know how tall your cake is going to be before you go to Home Depot and purchase your threaded rod so that you can know exactly where to trim it. So I'm filling my layers with my buttercream, and as I'm stacking it, I'm noticing like, this is not gonna be the threaded rod. The cake is gonna be so much taller than the threaded rod. So whatever, I made it work. Another mistake that I made when making this cake was that I used chocolate box cake mix. That was probably the worst decision that I could have made, because what happens with chocolate box cake mix is way too crummy. So as I'm trying to trim and cut, the cake is just way too soft. So I definitely should have used a cake that was a little bit more firm and that would not come to room temperature as quickly as this cake did. It was a mess, y'all. Like, ugh. I tried my best to even the cake out. So now I'm coming in with my heart template and I'm using it to trace the heart shape out. I'm using a cup of hot water to dip my knife into in between cuts, because as you can see, the cake is so crummy that if I were to try to just go in and just cut straight through, it wouldn't give me like a clean, defined cut. Next, I am crumb coating the cake, because y'all see it's a lot of crumbs, so we gotta get those together. But I honestly would not have frosted the cake standing in an upright position like this. I would have taken it off of the structure and I would have laid it flat and then frosted one side and then chilled it, flipped it, and frosted the other side, because it just would have been 10 times easier to me. But I just want to show you exactly what I did and the lessons that I've learned. So you can try either way. You can frost it standing upright, or you can frost one side at a time. And yes, I am using a piece of plastic that I cut from a package of strawberries. And I did this because I found that that piece of plastic is very flexible, very bendable, and allows me to really get into those crevices of the heart and get it really smooth, especially those areas that you just can't use a regular scraper for. Now I'm going to repeat all of the same steps that I did when I applied my crumb coat, but now I am applying an additional layer of buttercream so that I can make sure that the cake is super smooth. It was super cold in my mom's house, so my buttercream was really, really cold and firm. So if you see me dipping my spatula into water, that's why, because my buttercream was just not cooperating this day. To get super crisp and clean edges, I chilled my cake and then I used my X-Acto knife to trim away the excess buttercream. So I'm using satin ice fondant to cover my cake, and I normally don't mess with satin ice, but I don't know what it was about this batch, but it did what needed to be done. So instead of covering the cake while it's standing, I decided to remove it from the structure and cover it while it's laying on one side. So here I'm just smoothing it out. I'm getting it adhered to the sides of the heart, which this part was pretty simple. It wasn't until I flipped the cake over that I was like, maybe I should have just covered it while it was standing. And I'm only saying that because this part was just a little bit more tedious. It took a little bit more time for me to cut away that excess fondant and to get the backside of the cake super smooth. So it was just bothering me that it wasn't super smooth and flat, but this is a technique that you can do. But I think I should have just taken a shot at covering the cake while it was standing, honestly. But here I'm just smoothing it out. I'm cutting away that excess fondant, trying to get that as smooth as possible and removing all of the excess fondant that I could. But eventually I was like, I'm over it. This is enough fondant. It's smooth enough. On to the next. Here I'm using 2 fondant smoothers so that I can smooth the sides again and snatch those edges. As I started smoothing the cake, I noticed that you could see the separation from the styrofoam base and the cake. And that really bothered me because I was like, dang, just messing up my whole little design. But that happened because I put more frosting on the cake than I did the styrofoam base. So it's all just lessons learned, and it was just a practice cake. Now I'm covering the cake board with this black fondant draped effect because I really wanted to level the design up. I didn't want to put this black heart cake on top of a white cake board. I made a lot of mistakes when I was making this cake, but I do actually really like the final design. I could have done better, but it was my first time. So I'm sharing all of my mistakes with you all. Hopefully, when you make your first structured cake, you can learn from my mistakes. Bye.